Hi there, I'm Dean Heskin, President and CEO of Swiss American Trading, and you are tuned in to our podcast, The Secret War on Cash. The podcast is designed to kind of get into some of the intricacies of our financial system, the global marketplace, our domestic markets, and there's been a lot of, we'll say, up and downs. There's been a lot of questions. There's been a lot of concerns. There's been some growth. I mean, we've seen in the last few years some great growth in real estate and the stock market. But yet it seems like there's just this cloud that is hanging over our economy to some extent. And that's why we came up with this podcast, The Secret War on Cash, where we take a look at, what are potentially some of the pitfalls that we may be running into. So I have with me my co-host, Chris Agelastos. Chris, good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks.
So I kind of went way broad on my intro, talking about things we talk about on this podcast, but it has been, the markets and the economy have held together pretty well. There are some underlying issues that have proven to be somewhat of a concern. We're going into an election, and we're going to be hearing a lot more about these things. There are some things I think that are within consumers' control, people like yourself and myself and those tuning in. There are a lot of things that are kind of beyond our control. One of those things beyond our control, let's start with this, our first article here. We have a government that, is very good about talking about increasing taxes on the wealthy, maybe lowering taxes for the middle class, how they're going to spend money, the things they're going to do that are going to be good and great, whatever. But the bottom line, Chris, at the end of the day, we have a government that is like a bull in a china shop when it comes to their finances.
Yeah.
And this is not a secret. This is no newsflash to anybody tuning into this podcast. But you have, looking at this first article here, Chris, a record $1.2 trillion worth of interest is what the government is paying this year. 1.2 trillion.
Yeah.
Now, this is the highest ever recorded. Let me find, I think I had a number here. I believe this number has doubled in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Just in the last 2 years. Now, it's obviously 2024. They are citing part of the problem in terms of what brought us to this place, where the payments associated with COVID and things of that nature. And certainly it did. But, when they start looking at, okay, well, this is what caused it, and they start to, kind of rationalize why it is this way, that's all good and well. But it doesn't take away from the fact, not only do we have a problem, but it's looking like we have an insurmountable mathematical problem. And there's, again, depending on this next election, there are some things that could make a difference. Clearly, what Trump is proposing will probably be the better in terms of at least wise trying to lessen the severity of this whole deal. But again, when you're talking about the amount of money that we're going to be paying, or we are paying on our interest this year, how in the world is this ever going to stop? And what does it look like if it doesn't stop? I mean, I don't see how. The only thing I can think of is like a reboot, a reset, or a default of some kind.
Yeah. You and I couldn't run our households this way. I mean, our government and their deficit spending is out of control. And if we did it, we would be out of business. And so you're right. How are they going to turn things around here? I mean, this is the first time that the interest payments on our debt have surpassed military spending. And it's essentially tied for number 2, I think it is, or 2 and 3 between, obviously Social Security. A lot of people probably know is our biggest expense, and then Medicare, and it was military spending. And so our interest payments have surpassed that, and we're right on the cusp of taking over Medicare too. So, and again, it's spending too much money. Is a big part of the problem, and then raising interest rates, which I know most of the people I talk to have felt over the last couple of years. But the government had to do that to try and slow the inflation, but then it kind of bites them as well because now they have to pay higher interest payments. So yeah, over $1 trillion a year in interest, and of course both former President Trump and Vice President Harris, are talking about making some tax cuts and also so more spending and entitlement programs. So who knows what they'll actually implement?
Well,
depending on who gets into office. But
it's a joke. I
yeah,
mean, it's an absolute joke. Like you're talking about, again, 1 trillion this year, doubling in the last 2 years.
mm-hmm.
This is just the interest, folks. This isn't
Right.
like, what they're spending on fixing your roads and things. This is just the interest.
Yeah,
And I mean, I would say it's laughable, but it's really not laughable. And you have, Kamala Harris, like you mentioned, wanting to put more entitlement programs, and then
mm-hmm.
it is insane that her offsetting of these costs is tax increases on the wealthy and corporations.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, give me a break. When you're
mm-hmm.
talking these kind of numbers, number one, entitlement programs should be, cap them at best case scenario, but it should be off the table. But I don't know if anybody's really sat down and done the math. There are not enough corporations and there's not enough wealth and wealthy people out there, wealth and corporations and wealthy people out there to substantiate, what they need to do in order to right this ship that has wronged itself.
Right.
Tariffs on foreign goods, like Trump is proposing, mm-hmm. never a bad thing for a plethora of reasons, mm-hmm. but it's scary. I mean, we are getting again to a point of mathematical impossibility at this point. And let's take a look at this next article. I mean, I really don't want to get into this too deep because it kind of gets me a little fired up, to be honest with you, Chris. But like looking at to break it down even further, 1.2 trillion in interest in 2024. Now you have the U.S. government is paying $3 billion every 24 hours, every day, $3 billion in interest on the national debt. $3 billion. And again, that's money, that's interest. That's like you and I, or people tuned into this podcast, or anybody in the country for that matter, interest is that thing that you get if you don't pay off that balance on your credit card. And mm-hmm. as everyone knows out there, the more of those balances you carry, that interest that's what causes people to default on credit cards is they just get choked out by the interest payments. So like, that's something that, again, I guess the reason I get a little fired up when I see articles like this, Chris, is that nobody's really doing anything to address it. And nobody's with that being said, proposing anything that, like, what are we going to do to stop this? And I guess mm-hmm. here's the point. You can't do anything, Chris. I can't do anything. People tuning into this podcast can't do anything. But what's going to be the consequence to you and I, or to the people listening to this? What happens when we get to that point of no return and we do start looking at a situation like a default? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're all going to pay for it. That's no shocker. The government doesn't really pay for anything. We as citizens pay for their decisions, and we're supposed to be able to elect people who are going to be responsible and do the right thing and manage our nation's finances well, and that hasn't been happening. And I like how they at least spell it out in here, $3 billion per day, because when you hear 1.2 trillion in a year, it's just such an unfathomable number, right? I mean, it's just it's so out there. But when you hear $3 billion, which is a lot of money, right? Everybody would love to be a billionaire. $3 billion per day in interest.
And Chris, not per work week, ladies and gentlemen.
Right.
Meaning not Monday through Friday.
Yeah.
Per day. Not taking
every 24 hours.
Off, not taking weekends off. Per
mm-hmm.
day.
Yeah. And if they cut rates, they were even talking in here, if they cut rates by 1%, which, people aren't expecting that 1% to happen overnight. They're thinking maybe a quarter or a 0.5% soon here, but cutting it even by 1%, which is big, it's still going to be 2.5 billion per day. So you're right. It gets a little. It's just depressing, right? It's like what's our way out? I think we're already past the point of no return. The question now is, how much quicker is it going to speed up, and when are we all going to be left, holding the bag?
Well, a lot of the revenue that we're talking about here, when it comes to the government, that comes from the American taxpayer. Mm-hmm. And the American taxpayer, like, even Lord knows we have a pretty adequate amount of entitlement programs in our country. And look, some of them are good. They're good causes, good purposes. I mean, we don't need to go. There's a lot of discussion to be made on both sides of that equation.
Sure.
But with that said, when you're talking about a $3 billion per day interest charge, that's like, again, you're taking taxpayer monies that is going to nothing good. It's going towards interest. Now, I guess if that is going towards, paying a retired person's, interest on a treasury of some kind, you could make an argument, well, that's kind of good. It is kind of good, except for when it becomes an unmanageable number, which is what it has become.
Well, and even those interest payments to those retirees, let's say, right? Well, sure, they're getting a little bit more interest now, but their expenses and cost of living is going up by more than the interest payment. So it's at the end of the day, it's not even really net benefiting those people. They're still going to be struggling to be able to pay their bills. So it's really, there's no way to look at it as a win-win situation, at least in my opinion.
I think part of the problem, again, from my perspective anyway, is just the fact that when we start talking about the debt, we start talking about interest, it's been such a worn out discussion, meaning it's been around forever. Most people, and I know this because I talk to people, it's like, yeah, whatever. It's just the debt. It's just the government, whatever else. But I mean, this cannot go on forever. It's just because, I mean, no different than how take the average consumer. Like, there's an old saying. If this shows you how much inflation has been over time. I believe, if I remember correctly, the old saying was, this goes back, Chris, probably 20, 30 years ago. If you owe the bank $1 million, the bank owns you. If the bank owes you $1 million, you own the bank. That was a lot of money, like 20, 30 years ago. That was a saying. That was been in the investment business. That was a saying that they had. Now, I mean, you're talking $3 billion interest a day. Who owns who at this point?
Right.
And the point, and that's the whole point of that saying, is that if someone or another entity owes you enough money, you have to really start asking yourself the question, who owns who? If the government owes all this money, who really owns who? And I think we all know the answer to that. So anyway, well, this is depressing. I'm sorry we had to it's just the numbers are crazy. Yeah, they're absolutely crazy. And it's I when I was looking at this topic, and part of me was like, I don't want to talk about this. It's depressing. But then it's like, gosh, how do you not talk about this? And it's like our podcast we did previously. It's like the things they don't discuss in the news that are so huge and consequential to our financial system, to each and every one of us. But yet all they want to talk about is artificial intelligence taking over, or like what they're doing with Tesla these days. And I'm not saying that stuff's not important, but there are some major issues that are brewing out there. And again, it's like the momentum that's building with this debt, the momentum that's being created with BRICS. I mean, there are just some things of severe consequence that I don't know how at some point it's just like we're not going to wake up and be like, whoa, what just happened? We'll know. People tuning in will know, but it just seems like it's going to catch a lot of the world by surprise. So enough of that. All right. Well, thanks, Chris.
Of course.
Those of you tuning in, as you know, if you'd like a free copy of our report entitled Secret War on Cash, call and get it. 1-800-289-2646, or visit us online at our website, www.swissamerica.com. And if you're not following us on this podcast, please do so. as we will bring you more information like this in the future. Thank you for tuning in and have a great rest of your week. And Chris, thanks for being with us here today.
Yep. Take care.